Within the astrological imagination, Sagittarius carries the fire of expansion, conquest, meaning, and truth. Ruled by Jupiter in the symbolic language of astrology, this sign is often celebrated for vision, courage, optimism, and an almost sacred hunger for horizons. Yet every radiant flame casts a shadow, and the emotional shortcomings of Sagittarius emerge precisely from the same force that grants greatness. The centaur aims toward the stars, but in the urgency to pursue distant purpose, the inner landscape can at times remain unexplored, untended, and misunderstood. What appears from afar as confidence may hide emotional restlessness, and what seems like freedom may conceal a deep discomfort with stillness. One of the most profound emotional shortcomings associated with Sagittarius is avoidance of vulnerability. Fire signs move instinctively toward action, and Sagittarius in particular often seeks motion as a remedy for discomfort. When pain arises, the instinct may be to turn it into philosophy, adventure, humor, or future plans instead of fully inhabiting it. Sorrow becomes a lesson before it is allowed to become grief. Disappointment is transformed into a new quest before the heart has named what was lost. This tendency often appears during periods of emotional intensity. The ending of relationships, betrayal by trusted allies, failure after high hopes, or moments in which life imposes limits on freedom. In such times, the Sagittarian spirit may attempt to outrun feeling by chasing meaning too quickly. The epic dimension of this flaw is almost heroic in nature. The archer believes every wound must become wisdom. While this eventually becomes a strength, in its immature form it can create emotional bypassing. The pain is not denied intellectually, but it is transcended too fast. The soul climbs the mountain of interpretation before crossing the valley of human feeling. This creates moments in which others may perceive distance, coldness, or lack of emotional depth, even though internally the fire is simply trying to survive by moving upward. This shortcoming is overcome when Sagittarius learns that truth is not only found in distant lands, spiritual systems, and grand revelations, but also in the trembling honesty of sitting with fear, shame, loneliness, and sadness. Emotional mastery begins when the archer realizes that some journeys go inward rather than outward. The bravest expedition is sometimes the descent into one's own silence. Another emotional challenge lies in impatience with complexity. Sagittarius often seeks clarity, principles, and universal truths. This creates greatness in philosophy and vision, yet emotionally it can produce frustration with ambiguity. Human feelings are rarely simple, but Sagittarius may wish them to be. During conflict, especially in close relationships, this can manifest as a desire to solve the issue quickly, move on, and restore momentum. The sign's natural forward movement struggles with cyclical conversations, repeated insecurities, or unresolved emotional patterns. This shortcoming tends to occur when life demands sustained emotional presence. Family tension, long healing processes, complicated love dynamics, or inner contradictions that do not yield immediate answers. The Sagittarian spirit can become irritated by what seems repetitive or stagnant, interpreting emotional nuance as unnecessary heaviness. Yet beneath this reaction lies a deeper fear that staying too long in confusion may extinguish hope. The way through this challenge is not by abandoning the Sagittarian gift for perspective, but by deepening it. True wisdom includes paradox. Growth occurs when the archer understands that the soul's truth is not always linear. Some wounds return in cycles not because nothing has been learned, but because life reveals deeper layers each time. Emotional maturity transforms impatience into reverence for process. Sagittarius may also struggle with bluntness that wounds before it heals. The sign's devotion to truth can become emotionally careless when not tempered by compassion. There is often a noble intention behind the honesty, a refusal to live in illusion, a desire to liberate, a need to speak what others fear. Yet emotionally, timing and tone matter as much as truth itself. In moments of anger, disappointment, or moral conviction, Sagittarius may fire words like arrows, accurate but sharp, piercing hearts that needed understanding before revelation. This tends to arise when the sign feels confined, lied to, manipulated, or morally offended. Few things unsettle Sagittarius more than hypocrisy or emotional games. In those moments, the desire to cut through confusion can become ruthless. The flaw is not dishonesty, but the assumption that truth alone is sufficient medicine. The overcoming of this weakness is deeply epic. The warrior of truth must become a guardian of wisdom. Wisdom knows when a truth should be spoken, how it should be delivered, and whether the listener is ready to receive it. The most evolved Sagittarian fire does not merely expose reality. It illuminates it with mercy. Another emotional shortcoming lies in restlessness that disrupts intimacy. Sagittarius loves growth, movement, discovery, and possibility. While this creates an expansive heart, it can also make emotional rootedness difficult. When intimacy begins to demand routine, compromise, or repeated acts of nurturing, the spirit may fear loss of autonomy. This can lead to emotional inconsistency. Periods of intense warmth followed by sudden distance, not from lack of feeling, but from an instinctive need to reclaim psychic space. These patterns often emerge when commitments deepen, when responsibilities multiply, or when life narrows options. The Sagittarian psyche may begin to associate love with confinement, mistaking devotion for limitation. Yet the deeper truth is that the soul is being asked to discover a greater form of freedom, the freedom to remain. This is overcome when Sagittarius redefines liberty. Freedom is not merely the ability to leave. It is the strength to stay without feeling imprisoned. Emotional evolution arrives when the archer realizes that true expansion can occur within commitment, and that loyalty itself can become a vast landscape of discovery. There is also the shadow of over-optimism, a beautiful but dangerous emotional tendency. Sagittarius often believes tomorrow can redeem today. This faith is one of its greatest gifts, but emotionally it may delay necessary confrontation with reality. Painful truths can be postponed under the banner of hope. Red flags in relationships, personal exhaustion, grief, or recurring disappointments may be minimized because the spirit believes things will improve naturally with enough vision and faith. This shortcoming tends to occur during long periods of struggle, especially when dreams are emotionally invested with meaning. Sagittarius can become attached not only to people or goals, but to the story of what they might become. The myth of potential may overshadow the truth of the present. Beyond the visible shortcomings already explored, there exists a subtler emotional shadow in Sagittarius, the fear of disillusionment. Because this sign is animated by faith, purpose, and the conviction that life must point towards something greater, emotional pain often strikes hardest when it threatens meaning itself. It is not merely heartbreak that wounds the Sagittarian spirit, but the collapse of the story built around that bond, that dream, or that future. When reality fails to match the inner myth, a profound crisis can emerge. This often occurs after repeated disappointments, promises that were not fulfilled, or ideals that prove humanly imperfect. In such moments, the emotional shortcoming is not simple sadness but a temptation toward inner exile, a withdrawal into cynicism disguised as wisdom. The epic dimension of this challenge is the fallen banner of belief. The archer, who once rode beneath a sky of limitless promise, may suddenly feel abandoned by destiny itself. Yet this is not the end of the heroic fire. It is the purification of faith. The lower form of belief depends on outcomes, while the higher form is sustained by inner truth regardless of circumstance. Sagittarius overcomes the shadow by learning that meaning is not destroyed when one path closes. Instead, destiny reshapes itself through every apparent ruin, revealing that disappointment is often the sacred redirection of the soul. Another underexplored aspect is the emotional tendency to universalize personal experience too quickly. Sagittarius naturally seeks lessons, morals, and broader truths, which can lead to transforming deeply personal wounds into abstract philosophies before the emotional body has completed its process. A betrayal becomes human nature. A failed love becomes a lesson about freedom. A period of loneliness becomes proof that everyone must walk alone. While these interpretations can contain wisdom, they may also distance the heart from its own unique reality. This tends to arise when the pain feels too intimate or destabilizing to confront directly. By converting the wound into universal truth, the Sagittarian mind regains altitude and perspective. Yet true growth requires descending once more from the mountain of theory into the valley of lived feeling. The overcoming happens when wisdom becomes embodied, when lessons are not merely understood but emotionally integrated. Then philosophy ceases to be armor and becomes genuine illumination. There is also the emotional shadow of heroic self-reliance. Sagittarius often carries an internal myth of being the traveler, the survivor, the one who can keep going regardless of what is lost. This produces extraordinary resilience, but it can hide an aversion to receiving care. During moments of exhaustion, grief, or confusion, the instinct may be to disappear into solitude, movement, work, or personal quests, rather than allowing others to witness fragility. The flaw is not independence itself, but the belief that needing support somehow diminishes strength. This often appears after battles that have lasted too long. Emotional burnout, repeated responsibilities, family burdens, or prolonged uncertainty. The soul becomes so accustomed to being the one who rises that it forgets the sacred power of being held. Yet the epic lesson is profound. Even the archer of the heavens must sometimes lower the bow. Overcoming this challenge means discovering that true greatness includes receptivity. There is courage not only in leading the charge, but in trusting companionship during the night crossing. A further emotional challenge lies in resistance to regret. Sagittarius prefers momentum, and regret can feel like psychic quicksand, pulling attention backward into roads not taken. Because of this, the sign may rationalize past choices too quickly, insisting that every path was necessary even when part of the heart still mourns what was sacrificed. This can leave hidden chambers of sorrow unresolved, particularly around relationships abandoned too soon, truths spoken too harshly, or opportunities lost through impulsive action. These shortcomings often emerge in later phases of life, when reflection becomes unavoidable and the past begins to echo with more complexity than youthful certainty allowed. The Sagittarian soul then faces a deeper rite of passage, to acknowledge that wisdom does not erase grief over what might have been. The motivational triumph comes when regret is transformed into sacred memory rather than silent burden. The past no longer imprisons, it instructs with dignity. Another aspect not fully explored is the emotional volatility that can arise when freedom is externally restricted. Sagittarius can endure hardship with remarkable courage when the hardship is chosen in service of a meaningful quest. What unsettles the sign more deeply is forced limitation. Obligations imposed by others, environments that suffocate growth, relationships rooted in control, or life circumstances that seem to deny movement. In these moments, frustration can become emotional rebellion, expressed through sudden detachment, reckless decisions, or a dramatic desire to break away at any cost. The deeper reason is spiritual as much as emotional. Sagittarius thrives when life feels like an open road. Constriction awakens the shadow fear that the soul's destiny is being blocked. Yet the heroic evolution lies in distinguishing prison from discipline. Not every boundary is an enemy. Some structures are training grounds for mastery, strengthening the will so that future freedom carries greater purpose. Emotional growth comes when the archer learns that chosen patience can be as powerful as immediate escape. There is also the rarely discussed pain of moral loneliness. Sagittarius is deeply oriented toward ideals, principles, and higher truths. When surrounded by pettiness, dishonesty, manipulation, or chronic small-mindedness, the emotional response can become one of alienation. The sign may feel fundamentally separated from those who seem unwilling to live by larger values. This creates a shadow of judgment, where loneliness hardens into superiority. This shortcoming tends to occur in toxic workplaces, shallow social environments, or relationships where vision and ethics are misaligned. The epic danger is that the hero begins to see isolation as proof of greatness. Yet the more evolved path is humbler and more powerful, to remain faithful to ideals without losing compassion for human imperfection. Overcoming this challenge means realizing that not everyone walks at the same pace toward truth, and wisdom includes patience with the unfinished journeys of others. Another profound layer within the emotional shortcomings of Sagittarius lies in the tension between sincerity and self-protection. Sagittarius is often emotionally genuine in impulse, speaking and acting from what feels true in the moment. Yet because this truth is frequently tied to movement, inspiration, and immediate conviction, the sign can struggle with the emotional consequences of changing inner landscapes. What was said with total honesty yesterday may no longer feel aligned tomorrow. This does not arise from falseness, but from the mutable fire nature of Sagittarius, whose emotions are often shaped by expanding perspective. The shortcoming appears when others experience this evolution as inconsistency, unpredictability, or emotional unreliability. This shadow tends to surface during periods of rapid personal growth, spiritual awakening, exposure to new philosophies, or life-changing experiences that alter worldview. The epic struggle is that the archer's truth is alive, not fixed, and yet relationships often require continuity as much as authenticity. Emotional growth is achieved when Sagittarius learns to honor evolving truth without abandoning accountability. The highest form of freedom includes the courage to revisit what was once promised and bring clarity where change has occurred. A further underexplored aspect is the hidden exhaustion caused by perpetual emotional transcendence. Sagittarius possesses a rare capacity to rise above pain through meaning, humor, resilience, and future orientation. Over time, however, this gift can become a burden when the soul feels obligated to remain above the wound. The emotional shortcoming here is not avoidance alone, but fatigue born from constant spiritualization. There are seasons when the heroic self-image of being strong, wise, and forward-looking leaves little room for collapse. This often occurs after long cycles of responsibility, repeated emotional tests, or years of being the source of hope for others. The fire remains visible, but beneath it lies depletion. The epic symbolism is the warrior whose torch still burns while the hands that carry it begin to tremble. The overcoming of this shadow comes through sacred permission to descend. Not every battle is won by rising higher. Some are won by resting deeply. Sagittarius evolves when it understands that restoration is not weakness but preparation for truer ascent. There is also the emotional shortcoming of underestimating the gravity of attachment. Sagittarius often believes in the power of will, choice, and conscious direction. This can lead to the assumption that emotions can be redirected as easily as attention. Yet certain bonds, losses, and memories root themselves deeper than philosophy can immediately reach. The sign may believe it has moved on because the mind has already found the lesson, while the emotional body remains tethered to what mattered. This usually manifests after intense love, betrayal, separation from meaningful places, or the ending of identity-defining chapters. The shadow emerges when the soul tries to sprint ahead while part of the heart is still kneeling in the ruins of the old world. The motivational triumph lies in recognizing that true movement is not measured by distance traveled, but by wholeness carried forward. Sagittarius overcomes this by allowing memory to become part of its wisdom rather than an obstacle to it. Another subtle challenge is the emotional discomfort with dependence created by destiny itself. Sagittarius may willingly choose commitments when they align with vision, but life sometimes introduces responsibilities that are not chosen. Caring for loved ones, enduring economic constraints, rebuilding after crisis, or remaining present through another's long struggle. These situations can awaken inner conflict because the soul's natural instinct is expansion, while duty demands rootedness. The epic perspective reveals this as one of Sagittarius's greatest initiations. The hero of Horizons is asked to become the guardian of sacred ground. Emotional shortcomings surface as frustration, inner rebellion, or fantasies of escape, especially when the duty feels endless. Yet what transforms the flaw is the realization that devotion can itself be a pilgrimage. Not every journey requires distant roads. Some of the most mythic victories are won by remaining steadfast in one place until love itself becomes a form of transcendence. A rarely explored aspect is the sorrow hidden beneath laughter. Sagittarius is renowned for humor, wit, and the ability to bring light into darkness. Yet emotionally, this gift can become a veil. The instinct to uplift can mask pain that feels too heavy to expose directly. Jokes, irony, and playful deflection may serve as elegant armor, allowing the soul to remain socially radiant while privately carrying unresolved grief. This tends to arise in times when others depend on the Sagittarian spirit to remain inspiring. Family hardship, group crises, emotional disappointment, or personal failures that the sign does not wish to burden others with. The heroic lesson is not to abandon humor, but to allow joy and truth to coexist. The evolved fire of Sagittarius learns that authentic light is brighter when it emerges from honesty rather than concealment. There is also the shadow of emotional overreach, in which Sagittarius assumes that enthusiasm alone can heal, fix, or redeem every situation. Because the sign is naturally empowered by vision, it may believe enough courage, positivity, or bold action can resolve wounds that actually require patience, surrender, or acceptance. This creates frustration when reality resists heroic effort. Such shortcomings appear during grief that cannot be hurried, relationships where another person is not ready to grow, or circumstances where no immediate victory is possible. The archer then confronts a humbling truth. Not every darkness yields to fire. Some are meant to be walked through slowly. Overcoming this shadow transforms force into wisdom, teaching that endurance is sometimes a higher courage than conquest. A deeper emotional shortcoming of Sagittarius that often remains hidden is the struggle with emotional aftermath. Much has been said about the sign's speed, its instinct to move, transcend, and convert pain into purpose. Yet less explored is what happens after the battle seems over. Sagittarius may appear to have conquered an emotional storm through insight, distance, or decisive forward movement, but the residues of that experience can linger in subtle ways. Mistrust after betrayal, invisible tension after conflict, difficulty surrendering after disappointment, or an unexplained melancholy after achieving a long-awaited goal. The flaw lies in assuming that closure in thought automatically creates closure in feeling. This tends to emerge in the quiet periods that follow intensity. Once the journey resumes and the horizon is visible again, the Sagittarian spirit may be surprised by echoes from what was supposedly left behind. The epic symbolism is that of the victorious warrior who leaves the battlefield only to discover that the armor still carries the weight of unseen wounds. The motivational lesson is profound. Healing is not only about surviving the event, but about cleansing the soul of the energy it leaves behind. Sagittarius grows when it learns that emotional residue deserves as much respect as the original storm. Another subtle aspect is the tendency toward emotional absolutism in moments of moral injury. Sagittarius is deeply connected to principles, justice, and higher truth. When someone violates a core value, the emotional response can become total. A single betrayal may be interpreted as complete corruption, one disappointment as proof of unworthiness, one broken ideal as the fall of an entire world. This intensity comes from the sign's devotion to meaning, but emotionally it can create harsh inner verdicts that leave little room for nuance. These shortcomings often surface when trust is broken by someone admired, when institutions fail, or when personal ethics are compromised under pressure. The epic challenge is to prevent the sacred fire of conviction from becoming a wildfire that destroys discernment. Overcoming this shadow means learning that truth can remain intact even when people fail to embody it perfectly. The lesson is not to lower standards, but to separate eternal principles from temporary human weakness. There is also a rarely discussed emotional challenge involving delayed grief. Because Sagittarius instinctively seeks the next mountain, grief may not fully arrive when the loss first occurs. The immediate response can be action, logistics, meaning-making, or bold declarations of renewal. Yet the heart sometimes keeps its sorrow in reserve until the soul is safe enough to feel it. Months or even years later, an old memory, familiar place, or unexpected silence can reopen what seemed long resolved. This delayed return often happens after periods of prolonged survival mode, major life transitions, or when a long-awaited sense of stability finally returns. The epic perspective reveals this not as regression, but as the soul reclaiming unfinished sacred work. Emotional evolution occurs when Sagittarius stops judging the timing of grief and instead honors it as a messenger arriving precisely when the inner fire is strong enough to hold it. Another aspect not yet fully explored is the emotional burden of carrying too much future. Sagittarius lives through vision, often emotionally sustained by what can become rather than only by what is. This creates inspiration, but it can also generate hidden pressure. The sign may become so attached to future possibilities that the present begins to feel emotionally insufficient. Relationships are measured against their highest potential, careers against their eventual destiny, and personal growth against imagined greatness. This shadow usually appears during long-building ambitions, love stories rooted in potential, or periods where current reality moves more slowly than the Sagittarian spirit desires. The result can be frustration, emotional hunger, or disappointment with blessings that would otherwise feel abundant. The epic correction is to recognize that destiny unfolds in chapters, not leaps alone. The hero's greatness is not only in the final summit, but in honoring the present terrain. Sagittarius overcomes this by learning to emotionally inhabit the now without betraying its gift for vision. There is also the challenge of emotional overextension through inspiration. Sagittarius often uplifts others naturally, becoming the one who restores hope, offers perspective, or reignites courage. Yet when this role becomes habitual, the sign may begin to neglect its own emotional replenishment. The shortcoming is not generosity, but forgetting that the source of inspiration must also be renewed. This tends to occur in family systems, friendships, leadership roles, or communities where the Sagittarian presence is unconsciously assigned the role of morale keeper. The epic image is the torchbearer lighting the way for others while slowly exhausting the flame within. The higher lesson is that wisdom includes conservation of sacred energy. Emotional mastery emerges when Sagittarius learns to inspire from overflow rather than depletion. A more hidden flaw is the discomfort with emotional repetition. Sagittarius often believes lessons, once learned, should not need to return. Therefore, when similar fears, relationship patterns, or insecurities resurface, the sign may respond with frustration or self-judgment. Yet the psyche rarely heals in a straight line. Cycles revisit not because growth failed, but because consciousness is ready for a more refined understanding. These moments tend to occur during similar relationship dynamics, recurring professional disappointments, or repeated confrontations with self-worth. The epic transformation comes when the archer stops viewing repetition as defeat and instead recognizes it as spiral descent. The mountain path may circle familiar ground, yet each pass occurs at a greater altitude. What once seemed like the same lesson is in fact a deeper initiation. Another unspoken emotional shortcoming is the fear of sacred slowness. Sagittarius reveres momentum, expansion, and meaningful progress. Emotional situations that demand waiting without visible movement can feel deeply unsettling. An even more hidden emotional shortcoming of Sagittarius lies in the conflict between inner vastness and emotional specificity. Sagittarius feels life in grand arcs. Destiny, meaning, future, growth, moral truth, and spiritual ascent. Yet the heart often asks for something far more intimate and precise. It asks not for the philosophy of love, but for the exact sorrow of one betrayal. It asks not for the meaning of loneliness, but for the ache of one particular absence. The Sagittarian psyche can sometimes resist this narrowing, preferring universal understanding over emotionally specific truth. The result is a subtle disconnect in which the soul understands everything in principle while still remaining partially estranged from the precise human feeling that needs acknowledgement. This shadow often appears after deeply personal disappointments, especially those involving people, places, or dreams that once carried symbolic importance. The epic tension is between the sky and the single star. The archer sees the constellation but may hesitate to grieve the one light that vanished. Emotional growth occurs when Sagittarius learns that the universal is reached through the particular. A single honest feeling, fully lived, often reveals more truth than an entire philosophy built too soon around it. Another aspect not fully illuminated is the emotional burden of symbolic identity. Sagittarius frequently builds a self-image around being the seeker, the survivor, the optimist, the visionary, or the one who always rises. While these archetypes are empowering, they can become emotionally restrictive when the soul begins to feel obligated to perform its own legend. Pain then becomes something that must be transformed quickly to preserve the myth. Doubt becomes shameful because it contradicts the heroic self-story. This tends to occur after years of being admired for strength, wisdom, humor, or resilience. The emotional shortcoming is not pride alone, but attachment to the identity of transcendence. The epic lesson is that true heroes are not those who remain trapped by their own myths, but those who evolve beyond them. Sagittarius overcomes this when it allows the legend to breathe, making room for contradiction, uncertainty, and seasons where the fire is not triumphant but simply alive. There is also the subtle pain of emotional displacement through ideals. Sagittarius may sometimes love what a person, mission, or future represents more than what it concretely is. This is not deception, but the sign's powerful ability to see symbolic meaning in everything. A relationship may come to embody freedom, a career may represent destiny, a friendship may stand for loyalty to a shared vision. When reality inevitably reveals imperfections, the emotional disappointment can feel larger than the immediate situation because it is the symbol that seems to fracture. These shortcomings often emerge when projections dissolve, when admired people reveal ordinary flaws, when dreams require tedious labor, or when ideals must coexist with human imperfection. The epic transformation comes through separating essence from projection. Sagittarius learns that true greatness lies not in preserving symbols untouched, but in loving reality deeply enough to let it remain human. A further unexplored layer is the emotional impatience with invisible progress. Sagittarius thrives on signs of expansion, movement, and discovered horizons. Therefore, inner healing that produces no obvious external evidence can feel unsatisfying. Quiet emotional maturity, the slow building of trust, the unseen work of releasing old fear, or the barely perceptible strengthening of discipline may seem too subtle for the fire to fully appreciate. This shadow tends to arise in therapy like inner work, long reconciliations, family healing, or prolonged personal rebuilding after failure. The epic challenge is to trust growth that cannot yet be celebrated. Sagittarius evolves when it recognizes that the roots of future triumph are often laid in silent ground. What appears motionless may, in truth, be the deepest preparation for the next ascent. Another emotional shortcoming not yet fully explored is the fear of emotional inheritance. Sagittarius often seeks self-authored meaning, preferring to define life through chosen truths rather than inherited narratives. Yet family wounds, ancestral patterns, and early emotional conditioning may continue to echo beneath the sign's philosophy of freedom. The discomfort lies in realizing that some inner battles are older than personal choice. This often surfaces in repeated relationship dynamics, recurring responses to abandonment, money fears shaped by upbringing, or long-standing reactions to authority and trust. The epic dimension of this struggle is immense. The archer is not only traveling personal terrain but crossing ancient ground marked by those who came before. The motivational victory comes when Sagittarius stops seeing inherited wounds as threats to freedom and instead views their healing as the highest expression of liberation. Breaking an old pattern becomes a conquest worthy of myth. There is also the sorrow of emotional misalignment between pace and depth. Sagittarius can feel profoundly, but often processes through movement and widening perspective. Others may need slowness, repetition, reassurance, and lingering presence. This difference in emotional tempo can create misunderstandings, especially in close relationships. The Sagittarian spirit may genuinely believe healing or reconciliation is already underway because the mind has reached clarity, while the other heart still requires time. This challenge usually appears in long-term love, family conflicts, or friendships strained by differing emotional styles. The epic wisdom here is the mastery of rhythm. Great archers do not merely know where to aim, they know when to release. Sagittarius overcomes the shadow by learning that emotional truth must sometimes travel at the pace of the slowest wound in the room. A rarely articulated flaw is the emotional resistance to sacred endings. Though Sagittarius is associated with movement and change, endings that threaten identity, worldview, or long-held ideals can provoke unexpected resistance. The sign may cling not to the object itself, but to what it meant in the grand narrative of life. A finished relationship may feel like the collapse of an era, a lost ambition like the death of a prophecy. These moments tend to occur during major life transitions, aging, career reinvention, family role changes, or the closing of long spiritual chapters. The epic temptation is to keep the old banner flying long after the battlefield has changed. Yet the higher transformation reveals that endings are not negations of destiny but gateways to a wider mythology. Sagittarius grows by honoring the sacredness of closure, understanding that some arrows fulfill their purpose only when they are finally allowed to land.